Well, howdy there, Internet folks. My name is James Halifax, and you are watching PSYCBiz, a channel where we discuss psychedelic stocks and interview the CEOs behind your favorite companies. With that being said, let's hop into the show and introduce the man of the hour, Mr. Robert Barrow, who is, of course, the CEO of MindMed. Rob, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you, James?
I am doing perfect. And of course, today we're not doing any simple interview. We've got something special planned for you today. What are we doing, Rob?
You're asking me anything that comes to your mind.
Close, not quite. But so what we're doing is an AMA, and we've actually sourced the questions from Reddit. So I'm not sure, being the CEO of MindMed, if you're aware of this, but there's actually a Reddit channel dedicated to investors in mind medicine. And we put out a call to action there asking the investors, the retail investors in MindMed, if they had any questions for you for this AMA. And as you can see on the screen there, this was the call to action. We got lots of responses. We got over 80 questions, and we are going to be asking you the top 5 voted questions that the retail investors that are on the MindMed Investors Club had. So are you ready to go through these?
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Awesome. So we got a couple of softball questions and then a couple more hardball questions, but I'm sure you'll handle them perfectly fine. With that being said, let's hop into the first question. So it says from Mr. Captain Jack, I love the name, by the way, with the biotech industry taking a hit, investors of MindMed could really use a pick-me-up. What do the investors in the company have to look forward to in the near future? And are there any announcements or catalysts of note incoming? And what are you personally most excited about?
It's a great question. There's no hiding from the fact that the last 12 months in the biotech markets generally have been difficult across the board, and something that we're certainly looking forward for the tide turning on. We've over that time had, when we look internally at all that's happened over the last year, over the last 18 months, it's all been positive. We've continued to build out our team. We've had enormous progress on the regulatory and clinical fronts, and a number of productive external discussions and collaborations that have yielded some promising results. We had a readout from our LSD GAD collaboration recently in June of this year. We have a number of studies that are going to be either dosing their first patients or being initiated. We're anticipating in the very near term here. That includes across all of our programs.
Could you give perhaps a specific example of a program that's getting ready to start dosing patients?
Yeah, absolutely. Our MM120 LSD for generalized anxiety disorder. The study is actively recruiting patients right now. We're anticipating in the coming weeks or months to be dosing our first patients, and then to be really aggressively pursuing enrollment in that study and moving that towards a readout in the second half of 2023. So all of the build up to this point, all of the hard work that our team has done to get us here, to get through the regulatory approvals, to get the drug ready, to get the sites ready, to get all of the preclinical work in place, is now going to start bearing fruit, is now going to start showing in commercially sponsored, high quality, well-conducted clinical trial that we'll have data for next year. So incredibly excited about that one. On our MM110 program, we're also, we're in dialogue about exactly when that study is going to be starting, but it's going to be starting in the near term, we're anticipating. And we'll look forward to making an announcement when we dose our first patient for that study. And then at the same time, in our third program, RMDMA, MM402, we have a collaborative study with our colleagues over in Switzerland at University Hospital Basel. They're doing a comparative PK/PD study between the two enantiomers of MDMA and the racemic mixture. That study is also going to be getting off the ground in the middle of this year. So a lot moving from preclinical, moving from getting ready and preparations to actually dosing patients and having multiple trials ongoing with some exciting readouts in the very near term here. Across those and across some of the historical studies that we have ongoing with UHB. So it is a very exciting time. I know all of us would like to see high impact clinical data read out every single day or every single week. That's not the reality of biotech timelines and pharmaceutical development, but we're moving as aggressively and as quickly as we possibly can, and are really excited to get these studies into patients and ultimately clinical data out of them.
So just to recap, the thing that you're most excited for in the near term is the start of several of your clinical trials, the Project Lucy Phase 2B, attempting to treat generalized anxiety disorder using LSD, the start of, I believe it's a Phase 2A for 18MC, which is now called MM110, and then I'm having a brain fart. Which was the last one again?
Our MDMA,
Right. All right.
MM402. We're
Exactly.
excited about all of them. We don't have favorite children here, but certainly, certainly as we get further
Everybody
and further
says
in.
that, but I think it's usually a lot. In your mind, you have the one that you're most excited for. You're not ready to call out which one it is yet?
No, look, the excitement, one of we're always most excited about the things that are closest to commercialization in some ways, right? I mean, to the closest towards an approval. And so our MM120 program, LSD, that is one that certainly grabs headlines and raises eyebrows for some of the folks who aren't as close to this area, to the research for the psychedelic molecules. So that's one that I'm always excited to tell a story around, always excited about um, you know, the later development stage that it's in, and how fast we hope to bring that to market.
So maybe just before we move on to the next question, then, you referenced the fact that you put out some original data for the phase 2A trial for that, or the phase 2 trial for attempting to treat anxiety disorders using
Right.
LSD. Could you maybe just walk us through the top line data before we move on to? I know you probably don't have it in front of you, but generalized terms works.
Absolutely. I think the important thing, the backdrop here, right, that this was a 42 patient study, but it is effectively modern validation of what we've seen in over 500 patients historically. You go back to pre-Controlled Substance Act, pre-1974, which is when the last papers were published. There were over 20 studies in over 500 patients where we saw really promising results for LSD and anxiety disorders. Something that doesn't get talked about is that LSD, when you look at the body of clinical research of all psychedelics, LSD stands out. It's the one that is studied most extensively, where we see the most evidence. And so to have that backdrop, and then to confirm it with modern, high quality results, that was what really, really, in our mind, is a huge step forward in terms of our excitement and sort of internal de-risking of how we think about moving into the GAD program in phase 2B. That said, in terms of the actual data, we saw again rapid and sustained, clinically significant, statistically significant reductions in anxiety that lasted out to at least 16 weeks post treatment, and actually far beyond that. But it was a crossover study, and the first phase of it ended at 16 weeks post treatment. So again, what we've seen from other molecules, what we've seen historically, was confirmed in this study. We saw 65% response versus 9% on a placebo, and that's a 30% or greater reduction. So when we look at these data in the context of available therapies for depression or anxiety, I think we've all in some ways been spoiled with the psychedelic drug class because they have shown such promising early signs of efficacy, that we see massive effect sizes, and we look at it and say, yes, it confirms what we believe was already our prior expectation. But when you zoom out and look at it as a drug developer, when I look at results like this, or even with Compass's phase 2 readout in TRD, you don't see that with other drugs. You don't see that particularly with a single administration or just a couple administrations. That doesn't happen with any available therapies. So to see more and more evidence mounting, to see both internally from our studies and from others in the industry, that's really an exciting time to be moving this to the next stage of where we are.
Man, I wish I could talk about this for the entire interview. Unfortunately, we got to move on to another question. Maybe I'll get you back on the channel sometime and we can just talk about LSD for anxiety.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So with that being said, let's move on to the next question here. So this is from a guy named Twigs462. And actually, just a little aside, Twigs462 has been on the MindMed Reddit channel since the very beginning. So I think he is a original MindMed investor. So just wanted to give a little call out to Twigs462. He says, do they feel their cash runway is enough to bring anything to market without having to perform a stock split or another offering in the future?
Yeah. So what I point to here, and before I dive into the answer, I'll say I'll mirror what you said, and thanks to Twigs for all the support historically. As if you are an early investor, we always appreciate support of every kind from every venue, but particularly those who have invested in our organization or behind our mission. In terms of financials, I would have to point to our last earnings call where we did disclose and gave guidance that our cash runway right now takes us beyond all of our key readouts in 2023 and into the year 2024. That is certainly not a time frame whereby we'd be commercializing any of our products. And so certainly a stock split or a reverse stock split is not necessarily in relation to capital raising, other than obviously implications in terms of exchanges. But in terms of capital raises, certainly at some point in the future, either dilutive capital, non-dilutive capital, partnerships, there will certainly need to be additional resources dedicated to bringing these products all the way to market. It is a very expensive proposition to bring any drug to market, even those that have what we believe is a very efficient path forward with LSD, for instance, because we know so much about it historically. But certainly before we'd be launching the product into the world and commercializing it, there would be additional resources needed to take that forward.
So perhaps just a little follow-up that maybe you won't be able to answer, but do you think that in the future you would be again looking towards dilution or more towards a partnership with a company like Otsuka, like we've seen with other companies like Mindset and Atai Life Sciences?
Yeah, it's a question where we keep all of the avenues open. We're building the organization, the infrastructure, and the people to take this all the way and launch products ourselves. It's a financial and business decision, right? At a certain point, it becomes cost of capital, and even quote non-dilutive capital and partnerships is non-dilutive in terms of your equity cap table, but it is certainly dilutive in terms of economics. There's no free lunches. So at the end of the day, partnerships are sometimes an attractive opportunity. Raising capitals is sometimes an attractive opportunity, but there are a number of levers we can pull, a number of options available to us. And as an organization, as our leadership team, what we do is try to facilitate all those dialogues to make sure we're in front of investors, in front of partners, and have as many avenues open to us so we can have our pick and choose what is most in the best interest of the organization and our shareholders.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that response. And with that being said, let's move on to the next question. All right. So we have a question from Twist Frosty, and who doesn't love themselves a good Frosty? He says, "Hey, James, I was just curious if Mr. Barrow would be willing to talk about the patent issues surrounding 18MC, which is now MM110. If they feel like they dropped the ball there, or if we just don't know everything yet, most important." And I'm going to leave it there because the other two are kind of like different questions. So let's just focus on the patent issues around 18MC. So did MindMed drop the ball? Let's start with that, I guess.
I can confidently say that MindMed did not drop the ball.
Okay.
In terms of patent strategy and market protection, and certainly, as with any drug, but certainly drugs that where the molecule, the actual composition of matter would have been many years ago, you need to build layers of intellectual property, both in terms of patents and in terms of non-patent IP. And other strategies, again, to protect your market share. There's also things throughout development that we learned that we don't publicly disclose because it's not a material information in terms of financial landscape, but it is certainly important information for an R&D program that allows us to further refine where we take a molecule, where we take a program, where we take a clinical design. And so through all of that process, there have been increasingly learnings. I would say this is true across all of our programs, and is more of like a categorical statement than a specific guidance for any one of our programs. But we're always looking to file additional layers of protection to make sure that as we have discoveries, I mean, the patent process is sort of oriented around identifying a problem, solving that problem, and then being granted a patent to cover the solution you came up with. And so in many instances where we see challenges, where we see things arise in development that discoveries that others weren't aware of, we're not going to go out immediately and say, aha, we're this or this technical matter, but we certainly do always try to come up with solutions to those and patent any of those solutions that are patentable. So I think given the timing and the sort of duration of what it takes to file a patent, have those discoveries, have those inventions, file a patent, and for it to become public knowledge, it's a good thing in many ways, because what you see out in the public domain right now is sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we think and approach market protection and IP strategy.
So I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit, because there has been a lot of discussion in these investor Reddit boards, essentially. And I think where this question is coming from is there was discussion in around January that the original patent for 18MC had expired, and there was a new patent application that had been filed. But at least from the the digging of Reddit, there was a feeling that it was much less expansive, much more limited, and more focused specifically on metabolites of 18MC. So can you speak on that at all?
Yeah, I won't be able to go into any specific patents or issues, and that would sort of do a disservice to all of us and all of our investors. But what I can, again, just kind of categorically say is that we are certainly confident in our IP strategy across the board. We have continued to file intellectual property on each of our assets, each of our programs, and we're very confident about the direction we would take them, the ability to file patents that would, at the end of the day, I think something that can get lost in this conversation is that, there are certainly different types and levels of patent and breadths of claims and coverage. At the end of the day, the thing that is most important for a drug company is to prevent generic entrants from coming into your market. That is the whole point of intellectual property, is the whole point of market exclusivity, whether it's driven by patents or just FDA granted exclusivity. And so everything we do is led by that. As that's the end goal here. It's not just about having a mitt full of patents or a particular patent with a particular date. It's about a comprehensive strategy that allows us to keep others out of our market. And that's exactly what we pursue.
Okay, so at the risk of taking a little bit too much time, I was wondering if you could perhaps just expand on the other forms of, you said FDA exclusivity. I'm not sure that maybe a lot of people really understand what that means. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, the simplest one is that when you file a new chemical entity, when you have the first approval of a chemical moiety, it is granted 5 years of marketing exclusivity by FDA. There are many other forms of this, and there's sort of other iterations, but that's just sort of the baseline availability of market protection. That's irrespective of intellectual property coverage or anything of that nature. Uh, that said, patents extend the life far beyond that typically if they're granted later in the development cycle. And one of the things, again, that it's a balancing act. Composition of matter patents on a brand new NCE that was discovered several years ago in an academic lab, those are valuable, certainly, and everyone wants to have a composition of matter patent if possible. But given the duration of a development program, from the time that you first discover a molecule that's never been seen before, and you patent it, to the time you actually get a drug to market, you're often left with only a fraction of that initial coverage period anyway. And there's ways to extend your FDA granted exclusivity, but to both through marketing exclusivity, through the opportunity to bring in second generation products, but also through latent development intellectual property filings that we have and can continue to file. What we see is if we're successful in that strategy, right, what it does is give us even a longer tail on the back end. So FDA gives you 5 years, and then you can use your intellectual property portfolio and other strategies to make sure that it gets extended far beyond that 5 years.
Well, thank you very much for that answer, Rob. And with that, we will move on to the next question. This one comes from AnyCare9269, who says, with the share price below $1, what is the plan to prevent delisting from the NASDAQ?
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to our plans, and any plans that become formal plans will be promptly disclosed according to the obligations we have for rapid and full public disclosure. What I can say is that there are a number of ways, certainly as any organization that is listed on the NASDAQ, and there are many who are in this in the same situation given the broader macroeconomic environment over the last year and a half. We're obviously very conscious of this. We know all of our options and have regular dialogues with every stakeholder that would be included in this. And so we have very close tabs on this. We're monitoring it. We're making plans so that we certainly do not view delisting as a risk of any sort. And based on the timing and the environment and what option is most attractive to us and our board of directors, and we'll make a plan and announce that at the appropriate time.
So I guess the headline quote out of that was, we do not view delisting as a threat of any kind. I think I butchered your quote there, but that was the big takeaway from it. Awesome. And with that being said, let's move on to our last question, assuming I can count and we are in fact at 5. Not sure, but I think we're on our last question. This comes from Economy Practice 210, who says, what is the company's plan to commercialize, monetize its digital medicine products? Does the business help diversify the risk profile, i.e., greater chance of near-term revenue, even if the upside isn't as high as drug development?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and one that, again, optionality here is a great thing. So we already have a number of collaborations that are revenue, or at least cost offsetting, I should say, in terms of external parties funding work that we are doing in collaboration with them on our digital medicine portfolio. So there is already that opportunity to sort of validate our approach and continue those relationships that reduce the cost and ultimately are sort of cost offset arrangements. That said, there are certainly other possibilities to use our digital medicine tools, either with drugs that are approved before any of our products are approved, or that are already on the market that could be viable to us. And most of those that we're, our highest priority digital products are oriented to CNS disorders, central nervous system, brain health disorders. That's what our mission is. That's what we're focused on. There are a number of assets that that group and that organization prior to joining MindMed had that are also of interest. At the same time, where we see substantial opportunities with digital medicine is in combination with our drug development programs, whether they are formally combination products or companion products or just used together in some lesser regulatorily defined capacity. A lot of that is to be determined and subject to several iterations of regulatory negotiation and dialogue. But at the end of the day, we do have opportunities certainly that we could potentially commercialize some of our digital medicine assets. Where we do see economically even greater upside, I think, is if we can use digital tools to facilitate the adoption of psychedelics, particularly of our products. If that enhances accessibility, if that enhances the ability to get this to patients, it does two great things. One is it gets more of the patients who need the therapy access to therapy, but it also, again, kind of drives additional patients and the opportunity for additional sales and revenue in the longer run. So both options available to us. We haven't ruled either one of those out at this point.
So I was wondering if maybe you could discuss a little bit or give an example of a specific digital medicine project or product that you're working on, and just tell all the investors and potential investors what one of these projects actually is.
Yeah, so one of the clearest ones that I think is incredibly exciting to us is in-session monitoring for any psychoactive substances that have a perceptual disturbance. Let's call it. Psychedelic effects are one of those, but there are many other classes of drugs that have that. And to use a digital medicine tool when you go in for a medical procedure, sort of physiological, let's call it medical procedure, you get hooked up to vital signs and you're monitored. And those monitors, that information allows providers, your healthcare providers, to make informed decisions. It allows those providers, it's effectively a decision support tool. You can think of some of the digital medicine projects that we're using for in-session monitoring in the same sort of way. We're monitoring much more than just vital signs, but we're looking at a number of attributes for how patients have the best outcomes, how we can facilitate provider oversight in a less labor-intensive way, hopefully one day. There are specific requirements for clinical trials that FDA and other regulatory authorities mandate, but at the end of the day, certainly for this to get out into the world at the scale that we think it deserves, based on the data we have available to us today, we want to make sure that the burden is not so great that people can actually get treatment, and that it's not limited to a very select few of the highest socioeconomic class that can afford out-of-pocket MD psychiatrists to sit with them for an entire day. That's not going to be, at the end of the day, a highly viable commercial model. And so what we're trying to do is develop these tools for in-session monitoring such that other providers, not necessarily an MD, could be more easily made to deliver care. The patient oversight would be facilitated in a better capacity, and that ultimately at each level of a patient's patient flow and through a treatment cycle, that we are minimizing the burden both on the patient and on the provider, so that patients can ultimately access this therapy.
And at the end of the day, this is going to help scalability, which is going to be probably one of the biggest hurdles in the psychedelic medicines industry once these get out into the wild, like you were talking about.
It's an obvious challenge, and where there are challenges, there are opportunities for innovation. That's exactly what we're trying to do with the digital medicine front here. We, our whole team, our whole organization, from the top to bottom, come out of the pharmaceutical industry, and we know, we're obviously eyes wide open to all of the challenges that lie ahead in a drug development program, particularly one that is such a paradigm shift from how a lot of psychiatric care is given today. And so we have a number of approaches to try to tackle that. We certainly view the world as needing a more scalable and easily facilitated treatment environment for this class of molecules. And so that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with digital medicine.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Rob. Thank you for asking all of the questions, even the more difficultly worded ones. I really appreciate you being on the channel.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure, James.
Perfect. And with that, I guess we will hand it over to you guys. What did you think about the interview? What did you think about the AMA? Let me know down in the comment section. And as always, tell the algorithm that you enjoyed the video with your like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.